Matteo Messina Denaro.
Mateo Messina Denaro.
Mateo Messina Denaro.
Italy's most wanted mafia boss has finally been captured after spending decades on the run.
Messina Denaro is seen as the last in a line of old-school senior figures.
Denaro's arrest may be the final blow for the Sicilian Mafia.
Matteo Messina Denaro, considered by many to be the head of Sicily's mafia, had been on the run for nearly 30 years before investigators on the island finally caught up with him. The elusive gangster once ran a multi-billion-dollar crime network and boasted of killing enough people to fill a graveyard. Now, aged 60 and suffering from cancer, the man they call the last Godfather is finally facing justice.
Now you come to me and you say, Don Corleone, give me justice. But you don't ask with respect. You don't offer friendship. You don't even think to call me Godfather.
Hear the words Godfather and you surely think of Don Vito Corleone, one of cinema's greatest characters played by Marlon Brando.
Instead, you come into my house on the day my daughter's to be married and you ask me to do murder.
Francis Ford Coppola's movie is about an Italian-American crime family with roots in Sicily. As head of the family, Don Vito has to be very wary of his enemies, but he pretty much lives out in the open and is respected and feared. Matteo Messina Denaro, on the other hand, is certainly feared, but he's not been able to live out in the open. In fact, the 60-year-old has been living in hiding for the past 30 years, much of that time in a small village just a few kilometers from his birthplace in western Sicily. He was finally captured in the island's capital, Palermo, earlier this month, where he was about to attend a cancer clinic under the alias Andrea Bonafede. Reports of the arrest vary, but it's said that 100 members of the armed forces surrounded the area before closing in on him. When an officer asked him who he was, he simply replied, "You know who I am. I am Matteo Messina Denaro." His arrest was so important, the Prime Minister herself, Giorgia Meloni, flew to Sicily immediately.
Beh, sì, è una giornata storica, un giorno di festa. È un giorno di festa per le persone per bene, è un giorno di festa per le famiglie delle vittime della criminalità organizzata, perché il sacrificio di tanti eroi non era vano, perché qualcuno ha raccolto quel testimone e quella guerra è stata portata avanti.
Experts agree Messina Denaro's arrest is big news for many reasons. First, it shows Italy's justice system at its best. Messina Denaro disappeared 30 years ago without leaving a trace, not even fingerprints. But thanks to investigators' skill and persistence, they caught him. The man who was tried in absentia 20 years ago was found guilty then of numerous murders, including the murder of Antonella Bonanno, the pregnant girlfriend of a rival mafia boss, the killing of Giuseppe Di Matteo, the 11-year-old son of a mafioso turned state witness, and the killing of two anti-mafia prosecutors, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, whose struggles with the mafia were turned into a movie.
Are you telling me the members of the commission are responsible for all the killings?
Yes.
Messina Denaro was sentenced to life for those murders and can finally start serving his sentence. But investigators won't be leaving it there. They'll want to ask him what he knows about the man he replaced, the boss of all bosses, Salvatore Totorina, who was arrested in 1993, the same year Messina Denaro went on the run. And investigators will be quizzing him about the structure of the mafia. Who will take his place? Will it be Settimo Mineo, who was named Totorina's successor after his death in 2017, but is still in prison? Or Giovanni Mottisi, reportedly Totorina's most trusted hitman? He's on the run and may actually be dead. Or will it be Sandro Capizzi? The 41-year-old is alive and well, and not behind bars anymore, but does he have the pedigree to take over? While some experts believe there is no one who can take his place and that his arrest is the beginning of the end for the mafia, others warn it is far from finished.
Non abbiamo vinto la guerra, non abbiamo sconfitto la mafia, ma questa battaglia era una battaglia fondamentale da vincere ed è un colpo duro per la criminalità organizzata.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now. And Marisa Merico is the daughter of a former mafia boss. She actually took over his organization when he was sent to prison, but left the life and is now a criminologist based in Blackpool. Eduardo Zaffuto is the co-founder of Addio Pizzo, an anti-mafia organization established in Palermo in 2004. And finally, we have Felia Allum, who is a professor of comparative organized crime and corruption at the University of Bath. Welcome to all three of you. Eduardo, we heard there at the end of the report, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni saying it was a heavy blow to organized crime, the arrest of Matteo Messina Denaro. How big a blow to organized crime is it? And was he really the most powerful mafia leader in Sicily?
Yes, actually, the arrest of Matteo Messina Denaro is a very, very important event because he actually represents the last godfather of a particular part of the mafia, the one that referred to the Corleone family. So he was responsible of massacres and murders, including murders of young children. So he is basically a terrorist killer. And on the last years, he also has been very involved in business. So he also represents not only the violent mafia, but also the new business-oriented mafia that needs white collars and a particular, let's say, complicity of the society to go on. I mean, and the arrest of Matteo Messina Denaro has been a very good news for the entire country, not only for Sicily.
I mean, you're talking to us from Palermo, from the capital of Sicily. I've read many reports that say, you know, it's a great relief for the island. Is it really?
Oh, yes. I mean, I would say that everybody in Sicily, well, actually, the most part of the Sicilians reacted with a sigh of relief because the arrest of Messina Denaro represents sort of the end of a nightmare that lasted 30 years.
But what does it mean for him to be behind bars now? We've been hearing of many mafia bosses who have managed to run their operations from prison.
Well, the possibility for the bosses to run the organization from the jail is not possible anymore. I mean, it's now a long time that the particular regime of jail regime for the mafia bosses stop the possibility for the mafia bosses to still run the organization from the prison. So I would say that this boss is anyway a boss in decline. I mean, he's very old and very ill, but at the same time, as he represents, let's say, that particular violent side of the mafia, it's important for the Italians, him to be in jail now.
It's a curious thing. He was living in hiding, as it were, for 30 years, apparently not very far from his birthplace. Why do you think all of a sudden the authorities had this breakthrough?
Well, it happened also to previous mafia bosses like Totò Riina or Bernardo Provenzano. They have been basically hiding in Sicily because no mafia bosses want to leave the region, as they would lose the control and the power. I mean, for 30 years, he could benefit of the complicity of the protection of a part of the society. Otherwise, it would not be possible for him to stay fugitive for 30 years. So that's no doubt about that.
The details of the arrest are quite interesting. Apparently 100 armed forces personnel surrounded him. Was that excessive or required?
No, I would say it's required. I mean, whenever the police or the carabinieri arrest a boss of that level, they have to use all the possible measures in order not to lose him. So it happened in the past for other big mafia bosses.
Marisa Merico, your father, I understand, met Matteo Messina Denaro. What were the circumstances of that meeting?
So it was 1989-90, and he had a problem with someone in Palermo that hadn't paid for some merchandise. So he asked through a friend of Messina Denaro that that if he reached out to a friend of his, and they had a meeting with Torino as well in Calabria, and they said they would sort it. Obviously, my father was then asking for permission because he didn't want it to resort to violence on a Sicilian territory from 'Ndrangheta, which was part of what my father was part of and born into.
And do you believe he was the boss, as it were, in Sicily? Or is there someone above him?
No, I would. He's the old school, isn't he? He's just, his name carries so many volumes, you know. Just the fear of his name, because he was old school. Of course, you know, you link to the atrocities that were made, the violence, so many victims, which the more modern mafia does not want that, because it's not good for business. Whereas in them days, it didn't really matter. And that's, I suppose, was one of the first downfalls of their actions.
Yeah. Felia, that's an interesting point that Marisa raises, which is the evolution of the mafia. They don't want to bring heat on themselves anymore with these spectacular and very brutal murders. So how do they operate now?
So I think what Eduardo said was really interesting, that he in a way represents a link with the past, but at the same time he's very forward looking. So today what's important, as Marisa's also pointed out, is that they don't attract attention. So if they're going to get involved in rivalries or fights or battles across the clans, that's going to obviously cause bloodshed, and the police are going to start looking. Whereas what they want to do is to actually infiltrate the local economy. They want to clean their dirty money, the money made from their illicit activities. And therefore, what the important thing is to have a good relationship with what we call the grey zone, which is the professionals who will be able to help them to launder their money. So it's a kind of very flexible organization, one that adapts to new business opportunities like the new technologies, and they're interested in money and profit. So it's about being hidden and making money.
I've read in the Financial Times and elsewhere that the mafia business could be hundreds of millions across the island of Sicily, perhaps even 1.5 billion. Do you have any estimates?
Not really. I mean, I'm more interested in the kind of different levels of control that they have. In other words, we mustn't forget that they do intimidate people every day in their daily lives, that they do have a cover, economic help, but also political cover. You asked previously, why now? I don't want to necessarily speculate too much, but we might never know why now, whether it was just that the police got very lucky, or that his time had come and that his political protection had given way, and that a new generation has taken its place. So it is extensive, and also it's not only based in Sicily or in mainland Italy, it's also across the world, and therefore its danger is real. It challenges democracy, and it challenges the economy on an everyday scale. And so I think it's important for your listeners and your viewers to understand that this is not just an Italian problem.
Absolutely. Eduardo, Felia mentioned the element of control that the mafia exercise on the island, and as part of your job, you try to get shopkeepers and the community to resist. How do you do that?
Well, actually, we offer help and support to shopkeepers and entrepreneurs who have problem with the mafia, and in particular with the extortion racket. So, you know, the mafia still is involved in this business that is like basically a sort of tax imposed to the business and shops. And the problem with that is that the shopkeeper is alone in front of the mafia. In the past, you know, that was the biggest problem. So our organization started to offer assistance and support, not only legal assistance, but also, let's say, a wide range of help and support. And the most important aspect is the shopkeeper feel not to be alone anymore, and so he has the courage to report the protection racket demands to the police. And our organization support the business who refuse to pay protection racket with an ethical consumerism campaign. So basically encouraging the ordinary people, the consumers, to support this business who were brave enough to rebel against the mafia.
Marisa, despite the best efforts of people like Edoardo, we hear Italian officials, Sicilian officials, saying that this is not the end of the mafia. They will always find a way to survive through evolution or whatever. What would it take? Is it ever possible to eradicate the mafia from Sicily and from the rest of Italy, for that matter?
I don't think so. Personally, I don't think so. Just as when my family was sort of, everything went down and they went to prison and everyone was arrested, someone else stepped into the area and committed crime. It might not have been a family, it's more of a gang or just like there is now.
Yeah.
But because they are families and they do come from long lines of this, it's like almost a culture of, it's like a bloodline.
Felia, I think that raises the question, doesn't it, about who, if anyone, can take over?
Yeah, before I answer that, I just wanted to respond to the question that you'd asked, Marisa, because Giovanni Falcone, the judge who died, who was killed by Messina Denaro's group of Corleonese, once said that one day the mafia would be defeated because it is run by humans. It's a human phenomena. And as Marisa says, it's very difficult to actually see how that's going to happen because of the family networks, because of the blood ties and the perpetual kind of roots that these groups have. And I was talking yesterday to a police officer friend of mine who works in the financial aspect and financial crime. And he was saying, I don't know whether it'll ever be defeated because finding their money is just so difficult. They manage to recycle and infiltrate the economy in such a way that we just can't see where their money is. And that is the problem. It's just there's no way that, for example, we're going to be able to find half of what Messina Denaro owns. And that is part of the problem. It sort of disappears. And therefore, the link between the criminal and the legal becomes really kind of quite linked in and embedded. So it's very, very difficult to really see. As for your question around who takes over now, one of the other symbolic aspects of his arrest was, in a way, the fact that he was the last face that the police had, i.e. he's the last recognizable face. We don't know what the new generation of people look like. We don't know whether they're killers, probably not. They're much more professional, and therefore, again, they're hidden and invisible. And in a way, that's what's, I suppose, the worrying aspect for the authorities is we just don't know who the new generation are, whether they're professionals or whether they're just, normal people. It's just, we just have no idea.
And Felia, very quickly, do you think that his arrest will yield any information about the connections between organised crime and the politicians?
Again, I think I agree with Marisa. He's not going to become a state witness by the looks of it. We can speculate that he probably won't. Although some people have argued that because he's actually never been arrested and never spent time in prison, he might decide, because it's actually quite difficult to stay in prison, especially in solitary confinement. But I don't think necessarily that he will, and therefore we'll never know. And when Edoardo says it's the end of an era, for me it's not an end of an era, because we'll never know the truth. We'll never know the dynamics of the relationship between the state and this part of the mafia.
Felia Allum and Eduardo Zaffuto, thank you so much. Marisa, please stay with us, because we're going to take a little bit of a closer look at Marisa's extraordinary life now. She published her memoir, Mafia Princess, back in 2010, and it's just been adapted by Amazon into a 10-part series called Bang Bang Baby. Marisa's still with us. Marisa, let me ask you about the 'Ndrangheta. This is different. This is the mafia in Calabria region, and this is different to the Cosa Nostra, which operates in Sicily, and also the Camorra. What distinguishes them from the other two, and which is the most powerful now?
Well, it's all families, that these clans, isn't it? That's the origins of each one. So what distinguishes them is not very much, other than where they are. So yeah. Calabria, Sicilia, and Napoli. So, but the 'Ndrangheta now, I would say, has surpassed. I think with the vision that they've had, it's probably a lot more modern as well.
Are they a lot stronger in the very lucrative drugs trade?
Yeah, well, 80% of the cocaine goes through Gioia Tauro, which is in Calabria. Yeah. It's a well-known fact that that is happening now.
Your father, Emilio Di Giovane, he was regarded as one of Italy's most notorious mafia godfathers. What was it like to grow up knowing that?
Well, I hadn't actually realised that till I was about 13 years old, but I was obviously growing up with my family on my earlier years. Of course, as a child, you don't see all that because they are so nurturing and giving, just like a normal family. So that's what people don't realise. And then, of course, later on in life, it's not necessarily that they want you to proceed in that lifestyle. If anything, my father wanted me to, you know, become a lawyer or a doctor, or, you know, but I did go into that lifestyle. Mine was through love, meeting my my then husband, my first husband, and he was a soldier in the family. My father actually was very much against it.
Oh, that sounds very much like the meeting between Michael Corleone and his father, Vito Corleone. He says, you know, I wanted something different for you. I wanted you to have a respectable life. So how did you get drawn into it, even though it wasn't your father's plan?
Because at the end of the day, it was about loyalty and who they could trust. So I became sort of the money launderer, if you will. So when I say that, money laundering, I took money for merchandise. I took money to be put in the bank, to launder, you know, in activities. So, and you think, how many people can they trust with that? When you've got vast amounts of money in an organisation like that, where you literally have a money machine, because that's how much there is. You know, it's who do you trust? I used to think, well, why me? I was a very young girl, but I know part of it was that with my father.
Yeah, it's a very macho life, and you were one of the first women to take over a family after your father was jailed. How did people receive you? Were they respectful?
Of course, yeah, they were respectful. Outsiders of the family were respectful. I carried my father's voice. I'd like to say, you know, when they say I took over, I used to go and visit him in prison in Portugal, get messages. I would give it to each his lieutenants, his soldiers. You know, I would tell them. Of course, logistically, I couldn't always do that, so I had to take responsibilities for certain things that I had to do. So, thankfully, it was just logistically everyday things, and I had good people around me, which were his soldiers.
Of course, Marisa, some of our viewers will be wondering, how is it she's not in prison now, considering what she's just mentioned in this programme?
Yeah, well, this happened just nearly 30 years ago, and I did do time in prison. I did 4 years. 2.5 years was in the UK maximum Category A prison. It was HMP Durham with Myra Hindley and Rose West. So it was hard prison, and then I got extradited to Italy to do a further 1.5 years in maximum security prison. So you know, I did do my time, and of course I have habilitated now, not rehabilitated because I wasn't going to go backwards. Habilitated and into society, and I'm trying to give something back with my criminology degree. I go into prisons, I go into universities, I'm trying to get into schools, because I feel a lot of the younger generation, young children, teenagers, will listen to someone like myself rather than authority.
It's a final question. It's a famously difficult life to leave. Why did you leave the life, and was it difficult for you?
Yeah, of course. I left it. I tried to leave before. As soon as I had my daughter, I realised the seriousness of my involvement. Of course, I couldn't take it back. The deed was already done. So I tried to distance myself. But then, as you said, my father got arrested and I had to step back in. But that was done through love and loyalty with myself. It was never about power or anything else like that. And then, of course, I got arrested 2 years later, and I just thought, I don't want this life. I was lucky enough, because my mother was English, to have another life elsewhere in another country. And of course, now I've turned that around and I've actually become a criminal. I've got my honours degree. I'm a criminologist. I sort of lived one life of that side of being in crime, you know, in a mafia family. And then another life now of seeing things, putting things in perspective of also why I went down that sort of route. Why, of course, with me was the blood ties, and the way that I was so close to my family.
Well, it's a pretty incredible turnaround. Marisa Merico, thank you so much for your time today on The Nexus. Much appreciated. Thank you. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.